Gerlas van de Hoven is actually the CEO of a company called Genexus. In a second, he's going to explain what he and his company do. Lunceford is actually from Corning, and for the last 21 years, Case Western Reserve University has actually been a partner with Corning. And Corning's role in our Gigabit Fiber to the Home initiative is paramount. As you've heard throughout the morning, without fiber, none of this is possible. The folks that we've worked with for more than 2 decades, both here at the university back in the pioneering days of the late 80s, right through to today, are Lance and his colleagues. And finally, Carolyn Purcell is part of a Internet Business Solutions group at Cisco who have a global program in connected communities activities, and that invited Carolyn to join us today. She's up from, actually all of these folks are here from out of town to share a little bit of the work that's going on nationwide, in fact worldwide, where Carolyn herself is involved. And I thought we would just start by asking Gerlas a little bit about Genexus and what role is it playing in this fiber to the home thing that you've seen here. And Gerlas, I mean, this is not staged in particular, but help us understand kind of what you're seeing here in Cleveland, and and the work that you do every day with your colleagues in the Netherlands.
Well, thank you, Lev. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. You've been to the Netherlands, and you say to me you were impressed. Well, I must say I am very, very impressed at what's happening here. You certainly are not lagging. I think you are leading. Let me tell you a little bit about Genexus. Genexus is a startup company. We started in 2002. We're from the telecommunications, and you probably know that's when the bubble burst. And we thought, okay, what's going to be the next step? And we thought about it hard, and we said the next step's got to be fiber to the home, because people is who is creating the content. And so we set down what role we're going to play in fiber to the home, and we saw that many big telecom operators, they were just worried about producing and processing bits of information in the central parts of the network. And we said there's got to be a place where that information becomes accessible to human beings, people who don't know how to use complicated technology. And so that's what we focused on and developed a home gateway that is able to do open access networks. So that really makes it an open network place rather than just a way for a big telecom operator to sell you a subscription.
Gerlas, we're going to come back to open, but just say a little bit about what is going on in Amsterdam, and even though you're from Eindhoven, what work your company is doing in Amsterdam. Because I think when we think of the other cities around the world who are also leading, Amsterdam clearly comes to the front of at least my worldview. And just share perhaps with our colleagues here and the people online, what is going on. You're in the trenches making it happen every day.
Well, the Amsterdam project is a very early project. They decided to do fiber to the home, I think it was 2003 or so, when they started this project. And their goal was to create an open network in the Amsterdam area, and have now connected more than 40,000 homes to fiber. And all these homes have basically a choice. Anybody can choose, which service provider they go to. And this was a really key thing. It's had a lot of issues in terms of politics, and there was a lot of, corporate companies complaining about this type of network as being competitive and not fair. But in the end, people have now realized that this is the way to go. And in fact, the Netherlands has adjusted its regulation, I think very much due to the success of the Amsterdam project, so that now fiber is let's say, regulated in such a way that it's unbundled and open to all kinds of service providers.
We're going to come back to that very, very important piece. And if I'm right, something on the order of about 30,000 homes are currently connected with using your technology at the home, and it's on its way to the better part of about 350,000 is kind of the goal of the mayor and obviously the technical teams doing the work. So I want to sort of just turn sort of in this introductory piece to Lance and ask him to, from a Corning perspective, we go all the way back to Joanne's comment at the beginning of our morning together. She said, in her lifetime, she didn't expect to see a technology superseding the fiber qualities in terms of being a broadband platform. I mean, what's so special about fiber And yeah, let's start with that one. Like, what's so special about fiber?
Okay. Well, I'll first start with a data point on fiber, and you talked about it a little bit. But this week, Corning Incorporated announced a annual celebration, a year-long celebration of 40th year anniversary of the invention of the, what I would say, life-changing first optical low-loss fiber in 1970. So that kind of gives you a timeline of how long it's been since we started fiber. And obviously over that time there have been technological advances as well as applicability changes along the way. So I'll talk about a few of the features of fiber that are most prominent in today's broadband networks. The first is fibers are secure. It's very hard to tap, if you will, or get the information out of a fiber optic cable undetected. So you can be assured that your data is safe on the network from a physical plant perspective. Because light signals are transmitted versus electrical signals, you do not have to worry about effects of EMI and RFI. As well, fiber optic cables and apparatuses are lightweight and easy to handle, and this facilitates rapid installation, which I know we're all going to need as we go forward here to catch up. Today's cable, I talked about adaptability, and one of the things that Fiber Evolution has done along the way, and particularly around the cable part as well, is adapt to the changing environment. We actually have cables today that you can bend around 90 degrees and you can actually staple. And if you think about that for a second, attenuation is not a friend of fiber, and so bends, micro bends, and macro bends on that cable are not good. So to have the capability now to go into a multi-dwelling unit, a single fiber home, or a business application and staple those things up is pretty awesome. Fiber is very reliable. Once the system is put in place and tested, there's very little maintenance going forward. And some of the early feedback from early to the fiber to the home adapters, they are reporting on an annual basis up to about a 30% saving in their operations cost over their traditional networks. But the biggest thing, and the one you've been waiting on me to get to, is fiber is virtually you're future-proofing your network when you install fiber. So as the steep growth of bandwidth requirements continue, it doesn't require that you have to upgrade your fiber optic network or replace your fiber optic network. So in a sentence, you install the network once and let the bandwidth come.
That's great, Lance. That's great. So that gives us a lot to think about. Maybe I can ask you just to also reflect a little bit about what you're hearing here in Cleveland and what I know, also Gerlas very briefly described over in Amsterdam. Certainly in this country, I think here Eric actually referred to it in his keynote that there's almost and I don't think it's because we're in a cocoon here. There's a palpable excitement that we're experiencing, whether it's because of the innovation activities and pilot activities, testbed work that we're doing, the work that we certainly, the moonshot that Google kind of put out there with the idea of fiber to the home for perhaps 50,000 to 500,000 households across the country. From a Corning perspective, has the time come when, after 40 years of a product, that we're about to hit an inflection point as it relates to the residential experience? Again, institutionally, you've been doing this forever.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we hope so. But it's been a journey, and really it's been a journey across from long-distance networks to the middle mile that we've talked about, and now to the last mile, and then actually into the homes and residents. And so we're very excited when folks like yourself and folks, the announcements like with Google, because I think what it spurs an awareness across our nation that I think we need all to have. And one of the things with Google, they're not only incenting the municipalities and the neighborhoods to be excited about this opportunity, but they now have gone down to the individual personal level. And so they're asking that individual constituents get behind these programs. And so now it's just increasing the level of visibility. So from our perspective, we think that's great, and we think that is nothing but a catalyst of what they're doing and what you're doing to promote broadband.
That's great. So Carolyn, I mean, from a Cisco perspective, you have this global initiative, something, I may get it wrong, but smart connected communities would be kind of the 3 words that come to mind. And maybe I can sort of ask you to first describe what that initiative is kind of all about. And then, you know, I know that you and your colleagues have worked in Amsterdam and San Francisco and Seoul, and maybe share with us some early insights in terms of lessons learned when Cisco, a huge player at a global scale, thinks about smart connected communities. So first, what is it? And then secondly, give us some insights.
Well, smart connected communities is a sort of an outcrop from something we call connected urban development. And in 2006, Cisco made an agreement with the Clinton Global Initiative to select 3 cities and try to help them through ICT become more environmentally sustainable. So those cities were, as you say, Seoul, Korea, San Francisco, California, and Amsterdam, 3 cities that are known globally for their innovative approach to sustaining their cities and to growing their cities. The idea was that ICT, or IT as we call it in the US more, information technology, although it contributed to greenhouse gas emissions in the world, could have a dramatically greater effect when applied to reducing greenhouse gas effects. And we have gone through experiments, the idea with the 3 cities, in order to make these really genuine applications that could help their cities. We started with a concept, we built out a proof of concept, and then a pilot to demonstrate different ways that we could make an impact, we could have an impact. Some of these were around transportation, some of these were around buildings and managing the energy use in those buildings, and others were around helping people get around in a city, and it's amazing what the impact has. One of the big issues that we have taken under our wing, and to Eric, I would just say, when we talk about work anymore, I think we're going to see a dramatic change in the way work is done. We don't go to work anymore. Work comes to us, for those of us in the service industry. We can sit at a terminal like this at some time in the future in our homes, and in the meantime, in work centers that are built in residential areas rather in downtown areas. So I think that we're beginning to see how that is going to dramatically change. And there are lots of other things that, particularly when you talk about the Internet of Things and the addition, a couple of comments about that, just to give you some perspective, and we've talked a lot about numbers today, but IPv6, this addressing scheme that Lev elaborated on a little earlier, there are enough addresses to address every grain of sand on the beach. That's how many addresses there are. And if you can imagine then that there are that many things that can be sentient, the sensors that you talk about, that many that will come onto our network and exchange information, share information with each other and with major nodes on the network, you begin to see why the Gigabit application is necessary.
Great, I'm going to use that as a segue back to Gerlas, if you don't mind. But just 2 quick points. Again, I want to invite folks right after this panel to step across the street and take a look at actually sensors at work, addressable sensors, both in scales and energy management tools that are all part of the Alpha House and are all communicating not only with each other, but also the house itself communicating with the internet that is the Internet of Things that Carolyn refers to. The other piece Carolyn shared is that one of the great things that came out of the Connected Urban Development activity was the idea of how to manage buildings more smart. And here at Case Western Reserve University, we actually partnered and are partnering with Cisco to figure out from a university which has hundreds of buildings, how we can get smarter in the ongoing monitoring of those, with an eye that we can also do it with the high schools around us. And we can also do it with the healthcare facilities around us, because we are actually all connected with the exact same infrastructure, and the monitoring tools will allow us to more smartly allocate, right, whether it's energy or whatever other qualities we're looking for across this grid of smart institutional buildings or homes. And the home project is part of what we're doing across the way near the Alpha House. I'll say a little bit more about that at the end. But Gerlas, I want to come back to you because Carolyn mentions again how important the fiber is. Without kind of taking us, I know you're a PhD in physics, so I'm going to sort of just preface this by saying, knowing that I'm not a PhD in physics, help us understand the different ways that fiber can get connected to the home and draw a distinction between, I think early on, again, Joanne made the point of how important, for example, Verizon's activities are here, and that's one kind of fiber to the home. But I know that you folks in Amsterdam have chosen a different kind of architecture. And in sort of layman's terms, help us understand the difference. As it turns out, we're betting our farm on the Dutch model here, at least in University Circle for right now. So, help everyone else understand what it is that we're trying to do together.
Right. Well, let me start by saying this. If you're a telecom operator, and they're basically all the same around the world, the goal is to kind of sell your voice and internet subscriptions and your TV subscriptions at the lowest possible cost. And what you'll see is they deploy a fiber architecture where one fiber goes very deeply into the neighborhood, and then there's a passive splitter that basically just splits the signal. But what this means is you're not on your own fiber. You're basically sharing this one fiber that's going down into the neighborhood. And if you just want to provide some internet services, that's absolutely great. But if you want to go to the next level, if you want to do the things that you guys are doing here in the Cleveland area, if you want to do healthcare and HD quality and actually see the expression on someone's face and see if they're worried or not, you're going to need much more bandwidth, and you're going to need symmetric bandwidth. You can imagine if you have this point to multipoint, so the one strand being split, it's kind of a distribution. The uplink is very low bandwidth in a way. What we're doing in Amsterdam is we're doing what we call a point-to-point. Very simple, everybody gets its own fiber. Everybody gets a dedicated signal. So you have really pure symmetric connectivity. And now the bandwidth is so high that you can do much more than just an internet plus a voice subscription. So for maybe less interesting for a pure telecom subscription telecom play, the operator will say, well, I can save 15% on my fiber costs if I do this point to multipoint. But if you look at what you're losing, you're saving 15% on the investment, but you're losing a world of opportunities. And I think the Amsterdam guys have shown with their deployment, using Cisco's equipment and our equipment, that you can do much, much more with that fiber if you do this point-to-point architecture.
Great. We're going to let the audience ask if they have any more questions about point-to-point versus point-to-multipoint. But I do want to make sure that everyone does realize, especially our community here at Case Western Reserve University has, as it turns out, back to 1989, always had a point-to-point orientation, which was the idea that we would build it once, to go to Lunceford's point here. And almost now, it's fair to say, Dennis, 25 years later and on our way forward, and I don't know if Jeff's watching online or here in the audience, some of our engineering team who philosophically framed, those were decisions that they made 25 years ago and is serving us extraordinarily well. And as we think about what to then do with our neighborhood, we're not, although 15% is not trivial, the point is it's a 30-year build, and we want to be able to make sure that our community around us and all of us as service providers, educators, healthcare professionals, public safety officials, and the like, all have a sense that we have many generations of service levels and experiences to be able to offer to the community around us along the way. And so, for what it's worth, we have embraced not only the model that Gerlas has in the Netherlands, but also, as it turns out, his technology for what folks at the home can actually experience. And that's an emerging area where we hope, and I want to ask Luntz this question, in the next 18 months to 5 years, as you kind of look in the crystal ball, one of the things, no doubt, will be that there's going to be a lot of interesting innovation and scientific development going on. Maybe many more kinds of genexuses, as it were, growing up in this marketplace. But what other kinds of things, Luntz, are you seeing in terms of what happens as fiber gets deployed not only to middle mile, but also towards true end mile to the residential world?
I think in looking at some of the data analysis prior to coming. As far as fiber penetration in the United States, I think the latest statistics say we passed about 17 million homes in aggregate, and of that, we've connected a little less than 6 million. And what that means is a lot of times, for capital deferment reasons and some things along those lines, a operator will pass the neighborhood but not necessarily hook up a service until there's a demand. So there's the big difference in homes passed versus homes served, if you will. The prognosticators say that by 2011 that there will be 25% of American homes passed with fiber to the home networks, and then by 2015 they're talking about 34 million homes passed. Now, all that data that I was able to get was pre really your advertisements and Google as well. So I'm hoping those numbers will accelerate. And we believe, and particularly from our company, we're trying everything we can to do to make the deployment of fiber optic systems as easy as possible, because that will accelerate us. Not only can you get the homes passed approved, but it's how fast can you put it in. And so we're constantly in contact with our customers as well, trying to understand what their expectations are of the future, because I imagine somebody's going to ask the capacity question at some point. So, but
great. I do want to just key you all up, because this is my last question in this conversation, and then invite you for some questions to our three panelists. But maybe, Carolyn, you can sort of, again, when you look at the communities that you and your colleagues have been working with, what are some of the sort of key pieces of secret sauce, if you will, to sort of seeing the effective development, deployment, and adoption of technology in the Seouls, in the Amsterdams, in the San Franciscos? What are some of the key ingredients for making that all come together beyond the physical deployment of the fiber and/or some of the devices or monitoring tools?
Well, I think it's largely the ability to integrate information. It's that connectivity. It's the ability to bring different pieces of information together so you can inform somebody about, you can give them what we call situational awareness, something that we borrow from the public safety realm. But people can, rather than understanding a very narrow piece of what's available to them in terms of options, for example, they can get a much broader perspective just on finding a route into work every morning, to be able to take in the weather into consideration and real-time information about where the traffic problems are, and dynamic rerouting. You don't have to think through it. It happens automatically. Those kinds of things are already beginning to happen. I think that one of the agreements that these three communities would, or one thing they would definitely agree on, is the fact that the network is becoming a fourth utility. It is that important to our economy and to our evolution and the strength of our going forward. That is the raw material of the 21st century almost. And
it's nice, Carolyn, because it brings it back to Jim's just initial reflection on electrification as obviously one of the early 20th century utility plays. Let's open it up, if you don't mind, and there's several questions already out there. And if you just very briefly introduce yourselves, there's a question in the middle, there's a question over here. And again, just in a couple of moments, folks, we're going to step across the street together. There's lunch available for those who are interested across the street at the coffee shop part of our Alpha House, and then upstairs we'll be arranging for small tours to go upstairs. I just want to say one word before we get our first question from the floor, and that is that the Alpha House is really just that. It's one Alpha demonstration house. Right behind the Alpha House, for those of you who are visitors, we are actually working on connecting 104 homes to the same technology that you'll see in the Alpha House, and it's certainly part of the overall effort. So by May 22nd, we'll have another celebration of work as we light up the 104 homes in the backyard of the Alpha House, and we look forward over the weeks and months ahead to actually be announcing additional blocks. That set of 104 homes we're calling the Beta Block, and so stay tuned for additional insights on that. Let's go to our first question.
Gary Mitchell, can you talk a little, maybe just briefly about the commoditization of fiber? Let's just pick the last 10 years and how costs have dropped to get to the point where we are now, what the costs are that we're seeing in the neighborhood here, and what you expect maybe in the next 10 years as this really ramps up.
Great. And maybe we'll just ask Luntz and Gerlas, both from the U.S. and from an international perspective, to offer some insight on that.
So from a fiber perspective, as technology gives us these added benefits, and as well consumer consumption of the products, that obviously drives your cost factors. But there are new challenges and requirements that we see, just like I talked about the fibers that bend around corners, and those require a significant amount of investment. And Corning is a technology company and contributes about 10% of our revenues to development annually. So we will constantly, as a conscious decision, continue to develop into the next iteration or generation of whatever it needs to be to service a yet unknown requirement. But the cost of deploying fiber optic networks has come down significantly, to the point where in the early stages it was a hard decision, and you paid a penalty, if you will, in cost of deploying a fiber optic network versus deploying more of a traditional network. Costs have come to the point now that in greenfield, and there's two different types of developments. Brownfields are overbuilds of an existing neighborhood, and greenfields are when you have a new development or a new deployment. And it is really kind of consensus now that when greenfields are deployed, it is a fiber from the get-go. So the costs are now, under certain scenarios and certain circumstances, this fiber immediately. And I think we'll obviously continue to see the drive to make these networks as economical as possible, so we can have as much deployment as possible.
So Gerlas, Amsterdam is anything but a greenfield. You have a huge overbuild set of issues there of a century-old infrastructure, not to mention canals that have to be, and boathouses on the canals that no doubt have to also receive fiber. So speak a little bit from that perspective of Gary's question around sort of cost and investment.
Well, I think that's the big surprise that people have when they look at the Netherlands example. They say, but you're doing greenfields, and we're actually doing only brownfields. There's very little greenfield deployments in the Netherlands. I think the key thing is not only just the fiber, and as a physicist, you know, electrical wires are copper, fiber is sand. So in the end, fiber is really a lot cheaper. And the nice thing is you can put a lot of innovation in it. And I really like this new developments like this bend and sensitive fiber. That's very, very important. If you look at the installation, it's exactly that's the expensive part, right? It's not the ingredients themselves, it's the digging, and it's the work to get the fiber into the homes, into these century-old homes. And so and I think if you do that smart, if you innovate on that area, and we've come up with some very smart ways of, you know, fiber is not just a box where you plug in the fiber, because then the end user's probably going to trip over the fiber, it's going to break, and then you're going to have an expensive guy come in and repair that thing. So to do that in such a way, to manage the fiber, so to speak, and to provide it in such a way that you can just click on the active equipment, the home gateways, and then when you need a home gateway, maybe 5 years or 7 years later, you go to the next level of speed, you can just very simply slide out the fiber, click on the new modem, slide the fiber back in without actually touching the fiber. Those type of innovations really lower the cost of the deployment and lower the barrier to entry.
Great. We had another question.
Benjamin Wisnicki.
Hi, Ben.
Hey there. A couple questions about capacity, not just the fiber side, but also switching. What kind of upper bound are we seeing on bandwidth? And then from the switching side, what about things like latency and connectivity along the backbone between the different providers? If I'm in New York and I have a friend in San Francisco, it might be great that we both have a gigabit, but if we have horrible latency and packet loss, it doesn't really help me too much.
Great.
Thanks.
Those are terrific questions, and I'll let the physicist and the Corning guy, physicist too. Oh,
no, I'm not a physicist.
All right, Lance, why don't you take a run at the first piece of it, and then if Carolyn, feel free to jump in anytime you like.
Well, of course, we did recently make an announcement about our gigabit router, and I'm sure that is just the beginning of a continuous evolution in that product line, and also in addressing exactly the problems that you described.
And Ben, there's another piece of it that happens to have a Cisco piece, and we won't go too deep in it, but there's actually a backbone across this country called the National Lambda Rail. It's actually a higher education, research and education network, and it starts at 40 gigs. It starts at 40 gigs, and it actually uses, it turns out it uses all of Cisco's long-haul fiber optical routing. And so you could, from a university to a university, think about this, middle mile to middle mile, from here to San Diego, experience, as a number of folks have demonstrated, whether it's in dance, one of my colleagues who's here, Tom Nab, demonstrated several years ago, the ability to, with creatives, how to actually create new kinds of experiences when you could have low latency, end to end. So if that's what's happening at the middle mile today, in the most advanced institutions in our country, if you can play this forward, and that you know that sometime, maybe in the next decade, that could be the experience that you could experience from the end of the network. And that's the kind of scenario, at least I would imagine, that's possible. But let's get to the technical part of your question and see if there's some insights on the upper limits.
Well, if you look at it, we're in the home with the home gateway, and we're already selling these gigabit products. And then the interesting thing comes up, and I come from the telecom world and the fiber world, and they say, but where's all this bandwidth going to go? And I think that is exactly relates to your question. The good thing is, the good thing about the telecom bubble is was so enormous development of optical technology in that time, none of which was actually necessary at that time. But that is going to come, and everybody is very well prepared, and all the equipment vendors, like the Ciscos, are preparing themselves for this ever increasing amount of bandwidth, in the core networks. One of the big questions there is going to be on the energy consumption, not just because of greenhouse gases, but simply because the fact that the equipment gets so hot and it just doesn't work anymore. And there, optics plays a really important role because, let's say, the optics you need to switch a bit of information requires much less power than an electronic switch, and it goes much faster. So, although some of those technologies still need to get into practice right now, those latency effects will be answered.
Right. And Ben, Gerlas, you guys can follow up on the next point, but we're going to give the last question, I think, for the morning to Jim Baller.
Yes, Gerlas. As the FCC considers the issue of open access networks, should the distinctions between active networks and passive networks be a consideration they take into account?
Back it out. Make sure the audience understands open access one more time, and then get to Jim, so if you don't mind, Gerlas.
Right. So open access, and at what level should we do that? There's several ways to provide an open network, being a network that, let's say, anybody who wants to provide a service can get on that network and say, I'm going to provide that service to you. And then, of course, the question is, if he could do that by building his own fiber, in which case he owns the network. He could do that by going up to the next level by perhaps renting the fiber from somebody else, or he could go to another level and say, hey, I'm not even renting a fiber, I'm actually renting connectivity from a company that has put equipment in and is just providing me a virtual link, a virtual connectivity link between myself and my customer. And I think it's a key question. I'm in favor of open networks because they stimulate competition and because they stimulate development. Many incumbent operators are not so in favor of it because, in reality, they're not so used to competition. They've got a lot of customers, and they're just afraid of losing those customers. What the Netherlands has done is basically regulated fiber in such a way that at the level of the fiber, the renting of the fiber, it is an open network. So that means if somebody signs, let's say I'm a telecom operator or perhaps a healthcare operator or maybe a security operator, I could rent that fiber. But of course, if you have only one fiber, then, and you want to get services from multiple operators, then you have a problem. So then you need to go to the next level up, which is the level of connectivity. And this is exactly, I think, the role that equipment providers like Cisco and ourselves can play, is to create a platform. I call it like the iPhone of fiber optics, right? It's a piece of equipment that has an empty screen, and then operators, telecom operators, but also healthcare operators and security operators, and God knows how many different types of operators can create services, or why don't we call them apps right now, can create applications that go on that infrastructure, and then they just rent this connectivity. And then the role of, let's say, the traditional telecom operator becomes basically a role of selling connectivity to thousands and thousands of service providers.
Great, Gerlas. That turns out that's, although we only have sort of the very preliminary set of experiences here in Cleveland as it relates to this, our commitment as a university, obviously, to open access, after all, that's what we're building it for, has already spurred inquiries from content distributors, whether it's video or voice services, where they're going, right, we don't actually own any other end-to-end infrastructure, but we'd love to ride, even competitively, so that the person who lives in the home can choose which video package, which voice package, and for that matter, because we have a competitive healthcare space here, which healthcare operator you want to be working with, and essentially cut and paste. And I like the idea of using the smartphone as a kind of image for people to be able to think about.
Perhaps one thing to add is, operators always ask me the question, how are we going to make money, right? Because they have to do a lot of investment, and they're only providing the same package, and people are not paying any more for, let's say, getting more broadband. And I think this is exactly the answer. If they can sell, not one package, but they can sell 1,000 packages, then they're going to make much more money than they're doing today.
Right. Great. Folks, it's been, I hope you'll agree with me, an interesting morning. Before we go over to Alpha House, I would be entirely remiss if I did not acknowledge the work of the elves and the magicians who actually make all of this kind of work actually happen. It has been a Herculean effort to pull together this demonstration day. A huge salute to all of the technology community here, especially at Case Western Reserve University, for an enormous amount of work. I hope you'll also join me in thanking all of our panelists and Eric Garr today. It's been a terrific morning. Oh, Alpha House wants to say goodbye. All right, well, there's absolutely. We should turn to them. Hey, guys, we're on our way over to see you guys, okay?
Hi, how are you?
All right, we're on our way to see you guys.
Okay, well, great. Well, we're looking forward to seeing you. And Akian and Darnisha, we've been talking, and they've learned a lot. They've indicated that they have a lot to write about as it relates to a lot of notes because of all the content in the panel discussions, as well as the keynote, as well as the lab demonstration. So we hope that this, not only do you have an appetite for food, but that we've whetted your appetite for ultra high-speed broadband applications and real world live demonstrations. And for those of you who weren't here during the early morning with the introduction, we will be conducting demonstrations in the area of public safety, also energy management, healthcare, and education. We look forward to seeing you. We look forward to actually walking you through. And also before that, there will also be a student demonstration on a web portal. So with that, we thank you. We'll welcome you. We'll look forward to seeing the tours, which will last about 15 minutes. And it was a great morning. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Todd. That's terrific. Thank you to all of you.